We are in a series in the book of James. And book of James is a very practical book. We talked about it. It's a certain kind of disciple. And over the last few weeks, we've been touching on chapter 3, chapter 4, which centers around one key theme: wisdom for living. How to live life in a community with godly wisdom. And then he began to address in chapter 4 conflicts, how to resolve conflicts in families, in relationships. Then he brings it down to one group of people and he addresses the theology of life. He says, how you view life is important. How you plan for your future is important. Because your theology, whether you include God, putting God into the equation of your planning, will determine your life. So theology of life is important. And from there, he was speaking to a group of people called the business people. Because you have to understand, in the olden days, people have traveled from Jerusalem, from Israel, Jewish men and women. They have traveled to other parts of the world because now the Roman government has laid good roads. Greek has become a common language. And people are now enjoying the prosperity that one language and the connections, the road connectivity, all that brings. So people who are wired naturally towards entrepreneurship, they look at this and say, let me take this opportunity, go to another place, build a business, make money, then come back. So James was addressing that hard condition of planning for your future, trying to make profit and trying to live a certain kind of life without God in the picture. We have already established this in this house, that if you want to be godly, it means to put God into the equation of your life. The moment you put God into the equation of your life becomes godly because it's becoming God-centered. The moment you're planning for your future without God in the picture, you're very human-centered, anthropocentric. But the moment you bring God into the picture, you become God-centered. And God will then determine the terms upon which you live your life. So he addressed the theology of life. Now, in chapter 5, he addresses one specific group of people again who are found in the church, but they're also found in the community. They could be believers, they may not be believers, but he's addressing to them. And this group in chapter 5, verse 1 to 6, is the group that you will call rich. Rich. Circle that word rich. Because anytime you hear the word rich, you always think of your neighbor, not about yourself. Because everybody always thinks, yeah, I could be rich, but I'm not that rich. Look at them, look at them. The reality is, if you are seated in this building this morning and hearing through this PA system, you are rich. Anyone who lives in this country is richer than many people all over the world. So I need you to know that this message is not for the select few that you read about in the papers. This morning's message is for every single one of us that is seated or standing in this place. Because you and I, we are rich. The Lord considers, according to the world standards, we are. But I want you to pay attention to this because he addresses this group of people and he says to them something about their future. And I want you to pay attention to this because many times we forget and we only want to live for the moment. We don't live with eternity in mind. We don't live with future in our thinking. But here James addresses this group of people and he brings something within them. And he also wants to highlight how a rich should live with wisdom of God. Godly wisdom, not earthly wisdom, but godly wisdom. In life, pay attention to this, in life, there is a big difference between knowing what are essentials and what are non-essentials. Because a lot of times we fret about things, we worry about things, we anxious about things, we crave for things that are not essential for life. But we sweat it out for those things. So in life, if you really want to live a life of wisdom, you got to learn to develop a thinking and a discernment of heart to know the difference between what is essential and what is not. In the year 1912, when millionaires were quite rare, there was a group of people that were traveling in a ship called the Titanic in 1912. And while they were traveling and sailing, they were enjoying the company of fellow millionaires and enjoying the conversation. Suddenly, a mishap happened, and you know the story. There was one man by the name of Major Arthur Pukin. This man, when he heard that you have to now evacuate, find a lifeboat and jump on it, he went back to his room. He opened up his locker, and he found there he had $200,000 worth of bonds and securities. He had jewelry that he had bought for his family, and he had some precious things in that vault. But he left everything there, and he says on the way out, he picked up 3 oranges from the table in the fruit basket, 3 oranges, and put it into his coat and went straight to the lifeboat. Now, you and I, we need to ask ourselves this question. Why would a man who had $200,000 in bonds, which is a lot of money in those days, and it's a lot of money today if you convert it, would leave behind all those things and walk back and only pick 3 oranges and go to the lifeboat? Because he has learned how to discern what is essential and what is non-essential in that time. I want you to pay attention to me this. Why? Because James is addressing this, and he says there is a season, there is a future that many times we forget. And if you live in light of that future, you will live differently. It will affect the way you live right now. So here he says in verse 1 of chapter 5, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you." Circle that word, coming upon you. Coming upon. That means it's in the future. It's not right now. Right now, you're enjoying the fine wine and the dining, the wining and the dining, and the great company. Right now, you're living a certain lifestyle that the world celebrates as a lifestyle. And he says, but you forget something that is coming upon you, the miseries that are coming upon you. So there's something that he wants you to pay attention as you look forward to the future. And then he says, your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. You know, I grew up in Asia. Garments do get eaten by moth. You know, those garments that you never wear. It's just stored up there, and they never wear. And those are the ones that the moth come and eat. In other words, what he's saying is, you have so much goods that you do not need and do not use, but you store up and accumulate. So you have been holding on to things that you don't necessarily need for daily living, but you hold it because of your rich lifestyle. And he says, your riches have rotted, your garments are moth-eaten, your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. Circle those 3 words, evidence against you. He is bringing again this picture of a future. One day, all your wealth that you are storing up, that you do not need, but you have it, you're holding on to it, you don't need this, you don't wear it, but you have it in your possession. He says, one day these things will turn as an evidence against you. When is that? When is it going to turn as an evidence against you? That's the one day that's coming up. That's where the misery will come to those people. That's what he's bringing. Have this in mind. And then he goes in verse 3 towards the end. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Circle those 3 words. In the last days. Why? Because again the connotation is you're living in the last days. There is a misery that's coming upon you, and those things that you are storing and holding and hanging on to, and you claim to have your identity because of them, and you claim to have security because of them, these things, the very things, will turn around and become your evidence against you. And when they become evidence against you, you will be found wanting. The miseries are coming. So he brings it about, and he says, you have laid up treasure in the last days. Then, verse 4, behold the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud. Now he talks about not the wealth, but the workers. Because people who are wealthy know that they can get away with a lot of things, and including the oppression of people who are with them or under them. So here he says, you have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. Again, circle that. Against you. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You know, the cry of the poor have reached to the heart of God. And God says, yeah, I've heard it. The injustice. That means this rich is not only rich by storing up things, they are also rich by cutting corners, immoral means, by not paying what they are rightfully owed to people. That means they take and they find ways to cheat and to lie and to immoral ways they store up. And he says, one day that will come up and it will present a case against you. So he's bringing up another evidence. And then he says, you have lived on the earth, in verse 5, in luxury. Circle those two lines. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. Look at the language he uses. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You're like a sheep that keeps on eating. One more. More. Why? Because the more you eat, the more fattened you're going to become. And the more fattened you become, the more quicker you're going to end up in the slaughterhouse. You don't understand. You know, the chicken that wants to eat everything will end up in a Chinese restaurant as Hainanese chicken rice. Right? The duck that wants to eat and get fattened up will be hung on that hook. Char siu pork. Oh no, I can't. I know. When I see it, I eat it. That's how I know. My wife. Wonderful. What is this? What he's saying is the greed. You eat. It's all for yourself. Self-indulgence. Circle those two words. Luxury and self-indulgence. You know, again, this whole concept, what he's trying to bring is, there is a day that is coming. You got to live in light of that day. And knowing in light of that day, you need to know how you live life right now. You got to learn to discern between the essentials and the non-essentials. But you store up these things, it will turn up as an evidence. You shut the workers, not giving them what rightfully is theirs, and you accumulate. And what do you spend it on? You spend it all on yourself. You're getting fattened in your heart. And you're preparing yourself for a slaughter day. You lived in earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. Then he finally says, you have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. Finally, he comes back and says, guys, those people who you're cheating and trying to do, they didn't try to hurt you. They didn't try to oppress you. But you have devised a scheme to do all these things. Don't. Because God will hear them and God will defend them. Now, what is the theology in all this? I want you to pay attention to what I'm going to say next. Because one of the core things he addresses in this whole book is not so much what you say with your mouth, but what your heart makes you say with your mouth. It's not how you solve solutions, but what does your heart do in the process? He's been talking about the heart condition right through. So here, again, when it comes to wealth, again, when it comes to being rich, he's talking about a heart condition. He's not saying being rich is wrong. You know, being rich is wrong means a lot of people in the Old Testament would have been wrong. Abraham, Job, even Joseph when he was elevated and promoted. A lot of people would have been wrong, but it's not. But what he's saying is, that is the only thing. If you're pursuing it, that's your purpose in life, to make more and to accumulate more. If that is your purpose, that is your preoccupation. If that is the condition of your heart, then your heart is at fault. It's wrong because you're wired towards certain things. So he's addressing the heart condition. I was reading of a story of how the Eskimos kill the wolves. Have you ever heard the story? How the Eskimos kill the wolves? They take a very sharp knife and then they put animal blood, one layer, and then they leave it out in the open to freeze. Once the blood freezes in the knife, they plunge it again, pour some more blood, and then freeze again. And then pour some more blood, freeze again, pour some more. And the layers of blood will just come upon this knife. And then they will go and hide that knife in the snow. And at night, when the wolf is smelling for blood, it will smell this and it will come and it will start to lick. And the more it licks, the more the blood it tastes. And the more, the faster it will start to lick. All of a sudden, as it licks and licks and licks, the blood that is already on the knife and its own blood, the knife that cuts its throat, in its own tongue, it doesn't know the difference. It will just eat until it eats its own flesh and then dies, bleeds to death. This is the corruption that takes place in the world. The Bible declares that you and I, we need to pay attention to what happens here. Because if your accumulation is a condition of your heart, the condition of the heart is, I feel secure when I have stuff. I feel significant when I have stuff. I feel secure and significant because my storehouse is full. And the Bible calls that man foolish man, because you don't know what tomorrow will bring. So the reality is, he's dealing with a heart condition. Do you know how many believers suffer from this? We read in the Bible college, we do this sermon in the Bible college in Psalm 73. He's the worship leader for the entire nation of Israel, called Asaph. He's the worship leader, and he has a heart problem. You know what is his heart problem? He looks at the rich, the wicked becoming rich, and the poor in Israel, righteous people, staying poor. The wicked are prospering, and the righteous are struggling financially. So when he looks at this, he comes with his own heart, in his own words, he writes a song, and he says, something happened within me. There was an unrest. Look at this in Psalm 73, verse 21 and verse 22. Look at what the Bible says. When my soul was embittered, read that line with me. When my soul was embittered, when I was pricked in heart. When our soul was embittered, that means there's so much piercing, bitterness that has happened, and there's piercing, the pricking in my heart. And then, next line. Come on, keep reading. I was brutish and ignorant. I was like a beast toward you. He's saying, I was brutish and ignorant. Brutish means senseless. I cannot think. I cannot think between the essentials and the non-essentials. I became ignorant. I was like a beast. You know what's like a beast? The beast cannot reason why I want what I want. Beast just goes after what it wants. To steal, to kill, to destroy. The beast will have its way. And he says, I was like that. And my heart was embittered. There were some prickings that were taking place within my heart. He's a believer. He's a man who stands up and leads worship in the nation of Israel. And he says, that was my heart condition. I was brutish and ignorant, senseless, like a beast. Mark chapter 4, verse 19. Jesus uses a parable, and then in that parable he highlights this. There are people who receive the word of God, and the word of God will never take root in their life. Mark 4, verse 19. The Bible says, let's read it together. 3, 2, 1. But the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. What is the thing? Go back there. It is the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches. Circle that line. The deceitfulness of riches. It is the deceitfulness that comes when you think, when you're rich, what the deceit that you think is, I'm safe for future. There's security. There is significance. But God says, no. That's a deceitfulness. And the desire for other things enter in, and it chokes the truth away, and people's lives are unfruitful. That's the key we got to run away from. So he deals with these things. So how do we deal with a proper heart condition when it comes to wealth? 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 to 10. Let's read it together. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verses 6 to 10. But godliness with contentment, it great gain. What is a profit that you and I need? Godliness with contentment. What is contentment? Contentment is, God has blessed me. What is the contentment that he says we need to have? Go to the next verse. Come on, keep reading. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. So what do we do? But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. He says, if you have food and clothing, with this we be content. That means all of us here should be content. Wow. He says, if you have a simple Maggi mee or an Indomie, if you like it a little bit spicier, and if you have some clothing on top of you, you should be content. But everything else is indulgence. Can I humbly say, what is luxury? Luxuries are things that you don't need, but it's good to have. It's great, feels great, makes me look good. It's just a little bit of extra. I don't need that, but I'll have that. And I've always noticed this in life, from people's lives. Luxuries, once enjoyed, becomes necessities. All it takes is for you to enjoy it once. The moment you enjoy it once, the moment you bite that, wow, I want more of that. It makes me feel good, make me look good. Luxuries once enjoyed becomes necessities. In other words, we have to have discernment to know what is really luxury, what is really necessity. He says contentment is enough if you have food and clothing. Next line. Come, keep reading. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Next line. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Again, he brings out what Psalm 73 said. My heart was embittered. I was pierced with a lot of things. Here he says, it's because the love of money. What is this? It's a theology that he brings back to say to us, guys, you're living in a temporal world. Don't place your significance, your security on these things, but know and understand the purpose why God gives you what he gives you. If you know the purpose, your pursuit will be different. And not only that, if you know the right perspective through which you need to see wealth, then it will change everything. Once upon a time I was reading a magazine in the flight, and it talks about how they are building in this location, how they are building an ice hotel. Ice hotel is beautiful, right? Cost them about close to $1 million to build this, and 1,000 people have already booked to go and stay in it. All they provide you, everything is ice. The bed is ice, the cups you use is ice, the pillow is ice, and everything is ice, and people want to go and stay there, and I don't know, there's better ways for torture. And then they spend a lot of money to build that, but it's going to be dismantled as soon as that season is over. Life is like that. We put so much effort into what we are building, but what we don't realize is we're going to leave everything behind and walk away. So the mentality that you and we need to have is, how can I steward what God has given me properly for the glory of God? For this, there is some fundamental things that you and we need to understand. Pursuing wealth is not our goal. Pursuing God's glory and his kingdom advancement is the goal of every believer. Not pursuing wealth, but pursuing God's glory and his kingdom advance. That's the reason. And if you can rewire that thinking, then the perspective changes. Then everything changes. You start business not to make money. You grow, you expand your business not so that you can expand your security or significance or accumulation. You do it with a kingdom mindset. You do it with the glory of God and the picture of advancing his kingdom in your heart. It's different. This theology will change everything. There was a man by the name of Jack Eckhard. He owns about 1,700 drugstores in pharmaceuticals in US. And Chuck Colson shared his story one day. This Jack Eckhard read a book written by Chuck Colson named Born Again, and he gave his life to Christ. And the first thing he did as soon as he gave his life to Christ was call his president of his company and say, I want you to remove pornographic magazines from the shelves of all my stores, 1,700 stores. And the man almost fell off his chair. He said, it makes us $3 million, those things. You want to get rid of it? He said, yes, I want it out because I want to obey Christ. I want to honor God. And he did. They removed it. And then Jack Eckert wrote to all the other stores, retail outlets, and says, can you guys also do the same? Remove the pornographic magazines from your shops. No reply came in. But as time went by, what they noticed is the sales in his 1,700 stores was increasing up and up. Why? Because regular families started coming to the stores. Regular people started patronizing the shops. And his sales increased. So the others follow suit. 7-Eleven removed from 5,000 of their stores all their pornographic magazines because of that. They studied the market change, how he got more market share. So the story is like this. Nobody made a law to remove the magazines from the shelf. But what happened is one man took a stance and said, I want to honor Christ in my business and let God do the rest. Making money is not the motive. Honoring God is the motive. And if you can learn to honor God, He will do the rest. That's the key. So what he's addressing here is the issue of the heart. If your heart is right with God and your heart says, I want God's glory and the advancement of His kingdom, you will live differently. That's the key. He says, why are you oppressing? You people, why do you oppress the laborers? Oh, we oppress them because I want more, so I got to give them less. He said, that's not how a believer lives. You know, in America, they have these festivals where they have competitions for farmers to come and showcase their best crop. And the best crop will usually, the guy who produces the best crop will win. So one farmer was winning all the time in this county. So they went to him and said, what is the secret of you winning all the time? And he says, the secret of winning, because my crops are so good, is because I share my seeds with all my neighbors. And they say, what? Aren't your neighbors also participating in this competition? Yes, they all are. But I share my seeds with them so that we all have good crops. Why? Why do you do that? You know why? Because there is something called cross-pollination. The wind comes, it takes the crops, it takes the pollen from the other fields, put it into mine. So if my neighbor's crops are all bad crops, mine is the only one that is a good crop, guess what's going to happen? Cross-pollination, mine is also end up bad. So I share the seeds. They all get good crops, mine is better. When are we going to ever learn that in others doing well prospers you, makes you do well? You don't have to make someone else lose to make money. You don't have to make someone else lose for you to win. Kingdom theology is different. He's not a God who takes it from them to give it to you. No, He's a God who is able to feed you and them. It's a win-win. When are we ever going to learn? That's what He is addressing. It's the heart issue. He says, if God is the source of your wealth, if God is the one who owns all things, and you're mere steward, then you do what He says. You live for His glory, you live for the advancement of His kingdom, and you will learn how to love your neighbor and treat them well. And people, especially who work under you, you will not oppress them, but you will bless them. You and I will have a different view of life. In closing, can I say this? Go with me to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 10 and verse 11. Let's read it together. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 10 and 11. Let's read it. 3, 2, 1. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. Let's go back. Circle some of the things right now. He supplies what? Seed to who? To the sower. He supplies seed. Who's the He? God. God supplies seed to the sower and bread for food. Right there is where you need discernment. Right there you need to know what wisdom is. You know what wisdom is? Wisdom is to be able to tell the difference between what God gives to you as a seed and what God gives you as a bread. Not everything that comes in you eat. Fattened in your heart, ready for day of slaughter. Luxury and self-indulgence. That's what will produce. But the difference is in knowing the seed that He gives me for me to sow and the food he gives me for me to eat. That's the difference. And then what does God promise? He didn't say, I'll multiply your food. He said, I'll multiply your seed. And when he multiplies your seed, that means he multiplies the capacity for you to produce and reproduce and to have surplus. Why does he do that? Again, the purpose is there. For sowing. Not for consuming, but for producing. For sowing. And the increase of your harvest of your righteousness. And then next verse. Next verse. Why do we do this? You will be enriched in every way, to be generous in every way, through which you will produce thanksgiving in God. Or thanksgiving to God. What does it mean? It means this, that when you learn how to steward what God gives you, know the seed and the food you eat, the seed you sow, and the seed he multiplies, you keep sowing, more harvest of righteousness, God gets greater glory, and people who reap from that, people who are blessed by your generosity, they in turn, and along with you, will give thanks to God. That is why we have wealth, so that more people will be in every way be blessed and give thanks to God. The glory of God undergirds our thinking. That's why today's Heart for the House offering, all these things are part and parcel of our heart condition. It is not the amount, it is the condition of the heart. It is nothing to do, your giving, your tithing, your serving has nothing to do with the amount or what you do. It's everything to do with the condition of the heart. If you were in life groups last weekend, you would have realized this from Malachi 3. It's nothing to do with what you do externally. Everything to do with the condition of your heart. This morning, let's examine the heart condition before God. And if you're rich, pay attention. Nothing you own. Everything you have belongs to who? It's His. Have that mindset. I'm not the owner. I'm only a steward. And a steward is accountable. One day give an answer to everything. And I need to know the difference of what I'm consuming for food and what I'm sowing as seed. And let God produce a harvest of righteousness and thanksgiving to God. Let's stand to our feet. Thank you, Jesus.